Jack Monroe steadied his rover as the rocky terrain of Zarmina jolted beneath its wheels. The dusty red horizon stretched endlessly before him, the sun casting long shadows over the desolate landscape. Beside him, Dr. Alan Keyes, his longtime colleague and friend, manned the navigation systems, their eyes scanning for biological markers. "Still think this trip was a good idea?" Alan asked, his voice laced with skepticism as he adjusted the digital map on his screen. "It's not about good ideas, it's about necessary ones," Jack replied, keeping his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We're here to find life, or signs of it." The rover crested a hill, revealing a shallow valley below. Alan's instruments beeped insistently. "I'm getting some strange readings here, Jack. Looks like organic material?" "Not sure." Jack stopped the rover, both men stepping out into the chilly air of Zarmina. They made their way down the slope, the loose stones crunching under their boots. The source of the reading became apparent as they approached, a large, wolf-like creature lying motionless beside a rocky outcrop. Nearby, 3 smaller forms huddled together, cubs. "God, they look like they've been here for days," Alan murmured, pulling out his medical kit. "Do you think they're alive?" "Barely," Jack interrupted, kneeling beside the largest creature. Its sides heaved weakly. "We need to help them, Alan." "Are you sure?" "They could be dangerous," Alan said, hesitance clear in his tone. "We can't just leave them to die," Jack argued, his voice firm. He touched the creature's fur gently, marveling at its texture. "Look at her, Alan. This isn't just about science. It's about doing what's right." Alan sighed but nodded, setting to work alongside Jack. They administered first aid to the wolf-like creature, which Jack had started calling Seraphine in his head. The cub stirred, watching cautiously with bright, intelligent eyes. As Jack and Alan worked, the creature, Seraphine, let out a low, grumbling sound, not quite a growl, but a sound filled with pain and mistrust. "It's okay, Seraphine," Jack whispered soothingly. "We're here to help. You're safe now." Alan looked up from bandaging a wound on one of the cubs. "You named her already?" "Seems fitting," Jack replied with a half-smile. By the time they had stabilized the creatures, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting the valley into twilight. Jack and Alan prepared a makeshift stretcher from materials in the rover. "We need to get them back to base," Jack stated as they loaded the still weak Seraphine onto the stretcher. "She needs proper care if she's going to make it. And the cubs, too. They owe you their lives, Jack," Alan said as they began the careful trek back to the rover. "You had second thoughts about leaving a creature in distress, and now look at us." "Yeah," Jack replied, glancing back at Seraphine, whose eyes followed his every move. "And I think this is just the beginning. There's something special about her, about all of this. We just stumbled upon a new chapter for Zarmina." As they loaded the creatures into the rover, Jack felt a mixture of apprehension and excitement stir within him. The drive back was quiet, each man lost in his thoughts, pondering the significance of their discovery. What lay ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt a deep, unshakable conviction that they were on the brink of something transformative. Not just for Zarmina, but for all of them involved. The sun had set by the time Jack and Alan returned to their makeshift base, a cluster of portable habitats and research modules nestled in a shallow depression on Zarmina's surface. The air inside was warm and carried the faint, sterile scent of disinfectant. As they carried Seraphine and her cubs through the airlock, Dr. Helen Carter, the base's chief veterinarian, rushed to meet them. "What have you brought us this time?" Helen asked, her eyes widening at the sight of the alien creatures. "Wolves, or at least something close," Jack explained, helping to transfer Seraphine onto a medical examination table. "Found them in a valley north of here. Barely alive." Helen donned her medical gloves with swift precision. "Let's get to work then. Alan, I'll need your help with the scans. Jack, keep her calm if you can. She's likely scared." As Helen and Alan busied themselves with the medical equipment, Jack stayed close to Seraphine, speaking softly. "You're safe here," he murmured. "We're going to take care of you." Seraphine's large, golden eyes fixed on Jack, her breath still ragged, but steadying under Helen's expert care. She seemed to understand, on some level, that these humans meant no harm. "Jack, I need you to hold her still," Helen instructed as she prepared a tissue regenerator. "This will help close the wounds faster." Carefully, Jack placed his hands on Seraphine, feeling the warmth of her fur, the subtle strength of her body. Despite her weakened state, there was an undeniable power to her, a majestic quality that Jack found both awe-inspiring and intimidating. Alan, meanwhile, was checking the cubs. "They're dehydrated but should recover with fluids and some rest," he called over, injecting a nutrient solution into the smallest cub. "How do they end up like this?" Helen asked, not looking up from her work. "Not sure," Jack replied. "Could be abandonment, or maybe something forced them out of their habitat. This planet's still full of mysteries." As the hours passed, the team worked tirelessly, stabilizing Seraphine and her cubs. Gradually, the tension in the room eased as monitors beeped less urgently, and the creature's vital signs improved. Finally, Helen stepped back, peeling off her gloves. They should be okay with some rest and regular checkups. "Good work, everyone," Jack sighed in relief, watching Seraphine as she rested more comfortably. "Thanks, Helen. I didn't want to just leave them out there." "It was the right thing to do," Helen said, smiling tiredly. "Tomorrow, I'd like to try some non-invasive scans, see if we can learn more about their biology," Alan suggested, cleaning up the medical instruments. "Maybe find out why they're so different from anything else we've cataloged on Zarmina." "That's a good idea," Jack agreed. "And maybe we can start figuring out how to communicate with her. She seems intelligent." "More than just intelligent," Helen added, glancing at Seraphine. "There's a look in her eyes, almost human." Jack nodded, his gaze meeting Seraphine's once again. "Yeah, there's definitely something special about her. Tomorrow we start learning from each other." As the team dispersed to catch some much-needed rest, Jack stayed a moment longer, watching over Seraphine and her cubs. Despite the alienness of their form, in their vulnerability and need for care, they didn't seem so different from any creature he had known back on Earth. It was a connection, Jack realized, that transcended species, a universal language of empathy and compassion. As he turned to leave, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, eager for what the coming days would bring. The following morning, Jack awoke to the sound of chatter outside his sleeping quarters. Pulling on his jacket, he stepped out to find Alan and Dr. Eric Turner, the base's linguist and communications expert, setting up an array of equipment around Seraphine's resting area. "Morning, Jack," Eric greeted him with a nod. "Heard about your find yesterday. Thought I'd come down and see if we could make some headway in communicating with her." Jack smiled, pleased by the initiative. "That would be great. We need all the help we can get. She's awake and seems a bit more alert today." They approached Seraphine cautiously. She watched them with a keen interest, her eyes tracking their every move. The cubs, now looking healthier, played quietly in a corner of the room. "What's the plan?" Jack asked, looking over the devices Eric had brought. "I've set up a basic non-verbal communication interface," Eric explained, gesturing towards a screen displaying various symbols and images. "It's rudimentary, but should help us gauge her cognitive abilities and maybe even establish a preliminary form of dialogue." Alan joined them, carrying a tray with water and some food they had prepared based on the creature's physiological data. "Let's see if she's hungry," he said, setting the tray down carefully a few feet away from Seraphine. Jack observed as Seraphine cautiously approached the tray, sniffed the food, and began to eat. Her cubs followed suit, emboldened by their mother's actions. "Seems like a good sign," Alan remarked, taking notes on his datapad. "Okay, let's start with something simple," Eric suggested, activating the interface. A series of images appeared on the screen: water, food, the Zarmina landscape, and a picture of the rover. Pointing to each in turn, Eric spoke clearly and slowly. "Water, food, home, friend." He tapped the image of the rover last, hoping to associate their arrival with safety and assistance. Seraphine watched intently, her gaze lingering on the image of the rover. After a moment, she uttered a low sound, almost a mimicry of Eric's tone, though the words were unrecognizable. "Did she just try to speak?" Jack asked, amazed. "Possibly mimicking," Eric mused, excitement in his voice. "Let's try something else?" He switched the screen to show emotional expressions: happiness, sadness, anger, and peace. As each image flashed on the screen, the team vocalized the corresponding emotion. To their astonishment, Seraphine responded not with sounds, but by altering her posture and facial expressions in a way that mirrored the emotions being shown. "This is incredible," Jack said, watching the interactions unfold. "She's understanding and responding. Her intelligence is apparent," Eric noted, "and she's willing to communicate. This could be a significant breakthrough in interspecies communication." They spent the next few hours experimenting with the interface, documenting Seraphine's responses, and establishing a basic set of symbols for various needs and expressions. The cubs, curious about the proceedings, ventured closer, and soon they too began interacting with the simpler symbols. As the session drew to a close, Jack felt a profound sense of connection. "We're not just observing them, we're talking with them. This changes everything." "Yeah," Alan agreed, looking equally moved. "We're not just studying a new species. We're making friends." "Let's keep the momentum going," Eric suggested. "I'll refine the interface overnight based on today's interactions. Tomorrow, we can start teaching them more complex concepts." As the team packed up their equipment, Jack stayed back to spend a few more moments with Seraphine and her cubs. He felt a deep responsibility towards them now, not just as subjects of study, but as beings with thoughts, emotions, and perhaps even dreams. This project was no longer just about exploration. It was about understanding and connection. As Seraphine's gentle eyes met his, Jack knew they were on the brink of something extraordinary. The next day brought a gentle breeze to the base, carrying the fresh, earthy scent of Zarmina's untamed wilderness. Jack and Alan were already in the lab, reviewing the data from yesterday's communication sessions with Seraphine and her cubs. Eric walked in, holding a modified version of the communication interface. "Made some adjustments to the interface based on our initial findings," Eric announced, setting up the device near Seraphine, who was already waiting with a calm, expectant gaze. "Let's see if we can go a bit deeper today," Jack suggested, keen to understand more about Seraphine's background. They began with simple queries, using the symbols for past and home. Seraphine responded with a series of sounds and gestures that Eric quickly recorded and attempted to translate using the interface's database. Jack watched, fascinated as Seraphine's story began to unfold through the disjointed but meaningful use of symbols and sounds. "She's from a planet called Thera, a place with vast forests and large oceans," Eric translated. "It seems she was part of a community, possibly a pack based on these symbols." Alan, who was monitoring Seraphine's physiological responses, noted her stress levels rise when she mentions her pack. "There's trauma there?" Pushing a bit further, they introduced symbols for conflict and separation. Seraphine hesitated, her eyes dimming with what could only be sadness. She then interacted with the symbols in a way that suggested a violent disruption, a forced exodus. It appears there was a coup of sorts within her pack. A power struggle that led to her being ostracized and hunted, Eric deduced, his voice softening in empathy. Jack felt a pang of anger and sorrow for Seraphine. She was betrayed by her own kind, he murmured, glancing at her, and left to die with her cubs on this planet, which is nowhere near the coordinates of Thera. Isolation is punishment, Alan added grimly. But why send her here? To Zarmina? Eric scrolled through more of the data. Zarmina might have been a penal colony or a dumping ground. Our presence here might be more disruptive than we realized. The room grew quiet, each man lost in thought over the implications of their discovery. Finally, Jack broke the silence. "We need to ensure her safety and that of her cubs. Whatever politics or vendettas they escaped, they're under our protection now." Seraphine, sensing the gravity of their tone, nudged Jack's hand gently, her way of acknowledging their support. "Let's keep documenting everything," Eric suggested. Understanding her culture and the political dynamics of Thera could be crucial for her protection and any potential future interactions with her species. "Agreed," Alan said, "and perhaps we should consider relocating her to a more secure location, away from any potential threats from her home world." As they continued their discussion, planning both immediate and long-term strategies to protect Seraphine and her cubs. Jack felt a renewed commitment to their mission. This was no longer just about scientific exploration. It was about justice and sanctuary for beings who had suffered tremendous loss and betrayal. "Whatever it takes, we stand by them," Jack stated firmly, looking into Seraphine's wise, ancient eyes. "You're not alone anymore." Seraphine responded with a low, comforting sound, a testament to the trust and bond that were forming between them, bridging the gap between human and alien with shared compassion and a mutual desire for understanding. A storm was brewing on the horizon as Jack and Alan prepared for a field trip to gather more samples from Zarmina's diverse biomes. The wind howled outside the base, a prelude to the heavy rains that would soon follow. "Looks like we might get caught in the weather," Alan observed, checking the atmospheric readings on his handheld device. "Might as well gather data on the storm patterns while we're out there," Jack replied, loading the last of their equipment into the rover. Eric approached with Seraphine following close behind. Her cubs were now accustomed to the humans and scampered around her feet playfully. "I'm coming along today. It'll be good to see how Seraphine reacts to different environments outside the lab," Eric explained. As they set off, the skies darkened rapidly, and soon rain pelted the rover's exterior. Seraphine, seated next to Jack, watched the landscape change as they moved from rocky plains to denser, wooded areas. "This might actually be good for us," Jack said, trying to lighten the mood. "A test of how our equipment handles severe weather." Alan nodded, though his focus remained on the navigation system. "Just hope the rover can handle it too." As they reached a heavily forested area, the rain intensified, making visibility poor. Jack decided it was best to stop and wait out the worst of it. They parked beneath a large, overhanging rock that provided some shelter from the storm. "Might as well make the most of it," Eric said, pulling out some of the communication equipment. "Let's see if we can do a little more with the interface here, get Seraphine's input on this biome." While Eric set up inside the rover, Jack and Alan stepped outside under the shelter of the rock, watching the rain cascade through the trees. "It's like a different world out here," Alan said, his voice nearly drowned out by the sound of the storm. Seraphine joined them, her keen senses tuned to the storm. She seemed to communicate a sense of calm, standing solid and unafraid as the wind whipped around them. Jack looked at her, impressed by her demeanor. "You're not worried about storms on Thera?" Seraphine responded with a low sound, almost like a chuckle, and nudged Jack's hand with her snout. "Guess that's a no," Jack laughed, rubbing her head affectionately. Inside the rover, Eric worked to capture Seraphine's reactions to the sounds and sights of the storm through the interface. "It's fascinating," he called out to Jack and Alan. "She associates storms with a sense of cleansing, renewal." "That's insightful," Jack replied, stepping back inside the rover. "Makes you wonder what we miss when we only view things through human eyes." As they discussed their findings, the storm began to wane, and a serene calm settled over the forest. The sound of dripping leaves and distant bird calls filled the air, a stark contrast to the earlier chaos. "Should we head back?" Alan asked, checking the time. "In a bit," Jack said. "Let's enjoy the peace for a moment." They sat in silence, allowing the natural symphony of the post-storm forest to surround them. Seraphine lay down beside Jack, her cubs nestled against her. "This," Jack said, gesturing to the scene around them, "is what makes it all worth it. Moments like these." "Agreed," Eric said. "It's more than data and studies. It's experiencing life in all its forms." As they eventually made their way back to the base, the bonds between them, human and alien, had deepened. They had shared an experience that transcended the boundaries of species and scientific pursuit, a reminder of the universal power of nature to unite and inspire awe in all living beings. The base was quiet when Jack, Alan, and Eric returned from the stormy forest. Seraphine and her cubs seemed relaxed, settling into the shelter of the habitat. Jack stretched his arms, feeling the exhaustion of the day's trip creeping in, when a sharp ping from the base's monitoring system interrupted the calm. "What's that?" Alan asked, moving quickly to the console. Jack leaned over Alan's shoulder, watching the monitor. A small drone hovered on the screen, moving steadily toward their location. "Unscheduled visitor," Eric said, narrowing his eyes. "Looks like it's from the surveyor team." Jack frowned. "Why would they be out here?" "They're supposed to stay in Sector Delta." "They might have detected unusual activity," Alan suggested. "And we've been broadcasting a lot of energy signatures lately with the interface." Jack paced the room, rubbing his chin. "If they find Seraphine and the Cubs, it could lead to trouble. We don't know how they'd react, and we can't risk her being taken away." Eric nodded. "We need to act fast. Let's move her and the Cubs into the secondary habitat. It's shielded from scans." "I'll grab some blankets for the Cubs," Alan said, already heading toward the storage area. "Eric, you handle the interface and shut down non-essential systems," Jack instructed. "We need to reduce our energy output." "I'll get Seraphine." Moving quickly, Jack knelt beside Seraphine, speaking softly. "We need to move you and the little ones for a while. It's for your safety." Seraphine tilted her head, her sharp golden eyes studying Jack before she let out a low rumble of understanding. She nuzzled the Cubs, gathering them close as Jack guided them toward the secondary habitat. The habitat was a smaller, portable module tucked behind the main base. Jack and Alan set up a comfortable area for Seraphine and her Cubs while Eric monitored the drone's approach. "They're about 2 kilometers out," Eric reported through the comms. No sign of stopping. Jack secured the door to the secondary habitat, ensuring everything was in place. He crouched down beside Seraphine, meeting her gaze. "Stay quiet and keep the Cubs calm. We'll take care of this." Seraphine responded with a soft, almost reassuring sound, as if she trusted Jack implicitly. Back at the main base, the drone had arrived, its sleek frame reflecting the fading light of Zarmina's sun. It hovered silently before landing near the airlock. Moments later, a communication ping echoed through the base. "It's Carter from the surveyor team," Eric said, reading the identification code. "She's asking to dock." "Let her in," Jack said. "We act like nothing's out of the ordinary." The airlock hissed open, revealing Dr. Elena Carter, a senior member of the planetary survey team. She stepped inside, her expression one of professional curiosity. "Monroe Keys Turner," she greeted briskly. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Jack said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What brings you all the way out here?" Carter set down a data pad, her eyes scanning the room. "Your sector's been lighting up with activity. High energy outputs, unusual biological signatures. Command sent me to investigate." "Just routine experiments," Eric said smoothly. "You know how it is, pushing the limits of what the equipment can handle." Carter raised an eyebrow. "And the biological readings?" "The scanners picked up something big. A new find, perhaps?" Jack hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. "We're still analyzing the data. Could just be a false positive from the storm interference." Carter's gaze lingered on Jack, as though she sensed something unsaid. "Mind if I take a look around?" Alan stepped in, his tone casual but firm. "No need for that, Dr. Carter. The equipment's sensitive, and unnecessary movement could compromise our ongoing tests." Carter frowned, but didn't press further. "Fine. I'll file my report based on the data we've gathered so far. But if there's something significant out here, Command will want to know." "We'll keep them updated," Jack said, walking her back toward the airlock. "Thanks for stopping by." As soon as the drone lifted off, the tension in the room broke. Alan let out a low whistle. "That was close." "Too close," Eric agreed. "She's suspicious. We need to be more careful." Jack nodded, his mind already racing. "We'll have to limit external activity for a while. And we need to make sure Seraphine and the Cubs are completely hidden from their scans." Alan folded his arms. "Do you think she'll come back?" "Maybe," Jack said. "But we'll be ready." That night, Jack visited the secondary habitat, sitting beside Seraphine as the Cubs curled up around her. She seemed calm, though her eyes flicked to him with an unspoken question. "We handled it," Jack said quietly. "You're safe. For now." Seraphine nuzzled his hand, a gesture of gratitude that made Jack's chest tighten. He rested his hand on her head, a silent promise passing between them. No matter what came next, he would protect her and her family. Together, they would face whatever challenges Zarmina or the universe through their way. The hum of the base's systems filled the quiet as Jack, Alan, and Eric sat around the planning table, the holographic map of Zarmina projected between them. The recent visit from Dr. Carter had left a lingering unease in the air. "She'll be back," Alan said, breaking the silence. "Command won't let those readings go. We need a permanent solution." Jack nodded, his jaw tight. "Seraphine and the Cubs can't stay here. We got to find a safe place for them." Eric leaned forward, tapping the map. "There's a region to the west. Dense forest, naturally shielded from scans by mineral deposits in the ground. It's remote, hard to navigate, but it could work." "It's a risk," Alan said. "If we move her and the Cubs, we're exposed. One wrong step, and Carter's team could intercept us." "It's a bigger risk keeping them here," Jack countered. "We've already been lucky once. I'm not gambling with their safety again." Eric studied the map. "It'll take us at least a day to get there with the rover. The terrain's rough, but it's manageable." Jack stood, his voice firm. "Then we start preparing now. Alan, you handle the rover. Make sure it's equipped for off-road travel. Eric, gather anything we'll need to keep them comfortable." Alan raised an eyebrow. "And what about you?" "I'll talk to Seraphine," Jack said simply. "She needs to know what's happening." The three men set to work, each focused on their task. Jack made his way to the secondary habitat, stepping inside to find Seraphine lying with her cubs. She looked up as he entered, her golden eyes meeting his with a quiet intelligence. "Seraphine," Jack said, kneeling beside her. "We need to move you. It's not safe here anymore." She tilted her head, listening intently. Jack pulled out a portable version of the communication interface, displaying a series of images. The base, the drone, and a symbol for danger. "We're taking you somewhere safe," Jack explained, showing her the map of the forested region. "Far away from here." Seraphine let out a low sound, a mix of curiosity and concern. One of the cubs nuzzled her, as if sensing her unease. "I know it's a lot to ask," Jack said gently, "but we're doing this for you and your cubs. Trust me." After a moment, Seraphine touched the symbol for the forest on the interface, her decision clear. Jack smiled, a wave of relief washing over him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "We'll take care of you." By dawn, the rover was loaded and ready. Seraphine and her cubs settled in the back, their movements calm and deliberate. Alan checked the navigation system one last time as Eric secured the equipment. "All set?" Jack asked, climbing into the driver's seat. "Let's do this," Alan replied, sitting beside him. "The sooner we're out of here, the better." The journey was slow, the rover navigating the rugged terrain with difficulty. Jack kept his focus on the path ahead, while Alan monitored for any signs of pursuit. Eric occasionally turned to check on Seraphine and the cubs, who remained quiet but alert. "This place really is a maze," Alan muttered, staring at the dense trees on either side. "Perfect spot to get lost." "That's the idea," Jack said. "If we can barely get in, neither can they." As they neared the forested region, the landscape shifted, the ground becoming softer and the trees thicker. Jack brought the rover to a stop near a clearing, stepping out to survey the area. "This is it," Eric said, stepping out beside him. "Natural cover, plenty of resources. It's as good as we're going to get." Jack helped Seraphine out of the rover, watching as she sniffed the air, her ears twitching. She seemed to approve, nudging her cubs forward to explore their new surroundings. "She looks comfortable," Alan observed, leaning against the rover. Jack nodded. "She deserves this. A real chance to start over." As the group worked to set up a temporary shelter and arrange the supplies, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They had done what needed to be done, together, ensuring Seraphine and her cubs had a future free from the dangers that had haunted them. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack sat beside Seraphine, watching the cubs play in the clearing. He reached out, resting a hand on her side. "We'll check on you, make sure you're okay. But this is your home now." Seraphine leaned into his touch, her eyes meeting his in silent understanding. In that moment, Jack knew they had made the right choice.